Hi, this is Matt Donegan from Challenger Stories. I'm here with Neil Davidson. Neil's the CEO and founder of HeyHuman. Now, what's really interesting about HeyHuman is they're a creative agency and in the marketing industry, and they've got a particular strength working with AI. Now, this is kind of bucking the trend at the moment. There's a lot of people in the creative industries definitely not embracing AI, a bit scared of what's happening. Really looking forward to this conversation with Neil. I think it's going to be really illuminating. So, look, Neil. Tell me a bit of background about HeyHuman first, and then we'll talk about the AI aspects of the business.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, so Hey Human, we started 12 years ago. There's a much longer story, but we started from what was a large agency group and we launched an agency from that, selling from us to from private equity. And at the time, we were just in a place where the world of marketing had become very kind of brand centric rather than people centric, hence the slightly weird name, which was really a kind of, when you're called Hey Human, it's to remind you to think about people first rather than what the brand wants to say. How do you connect with people? And that got us into how do we do that? And so we started tapping into things like behavioural science, or particularly behavioural economics and neuroscience, but both of them the light version, just to understand how brands can connect better with people using technology. And I guess that's part of what's sort of framed our view on AI versus some of the controversies about technology and creativity.
That's interesting. So, did you use Daniel Kahneman's work, Thinking Fast and Slow, and put that inside the aspects of the business? Because that's obviously that's a major piece of work
Yeah, and
about behavioral
ironically, it's
economics.
quite a hard read. There's a lot of
Yeah, yeah,
thinking
it
slow
is.
to
Yeah,
digest that. Yes, to the principles of that, but also, like I say, I think the irony of that is behavioral economics is quite hard to adopt in organisations. So we did do a lot of that work with clients, and particularly in the financial services. But we essentially boiled it down to there's three things that you can take from behavioral economics you need to think about, which is one, what's the behaviour we're trying to change, which is a different way of thinking about marketing challenges because people quite often think about awareness and perceptions. And then the second bit is what are the comparisons that people are thinking about that are relevant to your challenge, i.e., what's in people's heads already that you can tap into to create mental shortcuts. Always a hard one to explain that one. And then the really easy one is what are the barriers to that behavior? Because sometimes I think marketing, we've got this problem. Let's make people incredibly aware that this product, brand, etc., is the solution. The other way to look at it is how do we just take away the things that make life hard to make it easier to choose that product. So example I always use is a client could say, we've got a luxury shower product, we need to do an advertising campaign to get people to use it daily. You could do that. Or the behavioural answer is put a hook on it and people will hang it up in the shower and suddenly it's a daily product. So it's just thinking about things that way, and we started using that when we launched and we still use it to this day. So what we do with clients is a 90-minute workshop where we ask those three questions because it just looks at the problem differently, and then that gets us to a brief for creatives to execute sort of ideas, content, etc.
It's interesting in that, I mean, I've worked with lots of marketing agencies before. I used to own one myself. There's a lot of kind of dark arts around account management, to be blunt. But when it comes down to actually getting results, there's a lot of bluster. There's a lot of smoke being blown, and not a lot of it is actually embedded in real research, science, behavior. You've brought in behavioral economics, the psychology of selling as well. There's a lot of bluster, and most of the time, marketing agencies selling time and materials, not necessarily
Mm-hmm.
selling results. Did you find by using psychology, by using behavioral economics, that got better results for your clients, or did you think it was just a selling aspect, or was it a
I
selling
think
aspect of the business?
there were lots of benefits. I think one of the things was it was one of those pieces that had lots of unintended consequences. So if you
Mm.
start with an approach that makes people think about the behavior, I mean, for us, but also there's general research that shows that if you start campaign work and you think about a behavioural change, over time, those campaigns or that approach is always more effective than just a general, right, what are we trying to achieve and awareness and perceptions. So that's something that the bit of industry research as well as our own. But I think also it's become, I think, to your point about the dark arts, I think a lot of client agency relationships have become quite transactional. So having a 90-minute workshop, nobody wants to be in a workshop all day, least of all me. Having something that's 90 minutes but brings people together makes people think more about the challenge, makes people talk more about the challenge, and see things differently. So already for us, we usually came out with a different client brief to the one that started that workshop, because it's just a thing. When we all verbalize something rather than write it down, and when we verbalize it to other people, quite often clients go, "Oh, I didn't see it like that. I didn't realize when I wrote that
Yeah.
it comes across like this. I think we need to change that." So there was definitely that. It was also that we could test comms for effectiveness. People got different views on that. Yet again, some love it, some hate it. But rather than going, right, that is a type of ad that works better, let's always do that type of ad, it was more finding out what generally worked. And that got us to something that we call the unusual every day. And it's just now become a kind of useful reminder of what types of comms tends to work and how you need to get the mix of the unusual that gets you to notice something with the everyday that helps your brain process it and keep it in your long-term memory. So there was a lot of good things came out of that.
Yeah. So using science and psychology, getting results, thinking differently, that takes it beyond the veneer of standard marketing operations I've seen many times of just thinking of a strap line that you think is going to get cut through and an image and maybe trying to layer in some controversy in order to develop a campaign that maybe gets a bit of traction. What you're doing is you bring science into and known science, very highly respected science, into a obvious
Yeah.
conclusion. So that's an interesting aspect. You're obviously got a scientific mind because you're now doing, am I right? You're doing a doctorate in AI with
I
creativity.
am.
Could you explain
I
that to
think
me?
I have to hold my hand up and say I don't think I've got a very scientific mind. I think I'm just curious. I don't, you've got me rushing back to my science O grades. So I have to be honest and say I wouldn't say I'm a scientific mind. I think I'm just more curious. And when I think back, behavioral economics became a thing 15 years ago. So I felt like I had to kind of understand it better, use it better. The same with neuroscience. And then I went to a talk at South by Southwest 3-4 years ago that was just packed, and it was a creative talking about 7 tips for great creativity, and it was a very engaging talk. But then just something annoyed me about it, and when I looked into it, all the kind of assertions and the data that he used, because he had taken the time to bring in lots of creativity tests, a tolerance test of creativity and stuff like that, just weren't actually true. So and that kind of sucked me into like, well, what is the whole piece of creativity? What is it really about? What makes it work? And then as I got more into it, everything I looked at involved AI. So I couldn't not do the doctorate. It was a slightly different focus, but then I felt it has to be about creativity and AI and how and why we will and won't adopt it and in what ways.
So it's the train. It's not just coming down the track. It's steaming right through at the moment. Huge adoption right across the board. Had a fascinating conversation with Priya Lakhani, who previously used to advise the government on AI developments and how AI was going to be used in industry. There are the obvious ones around knowledge-based work, and I think that's where a lot of the focus has been There's been a lot of focus in automation, marketing
Yeah.
automation. We've seen a lot in there. Large language models can do many, many different things. Now, there's a lot of concern with the creative industry. There's been a lot in the press. Anything from AI writing scripts. Obviously, the Hollywood writer strike was in part because of that. And then the impact on the creative industry. We've seen a lot of film production companies under a lot of stress at the moment because of AI and what's happening. I won't ask you what your take is on it because that's a really, really broad question. What's your view on how the creative industries can embrace AI as opposed to run for the
Yeah.
hills?
I think people always assume that I'm all in for AI. I'm not. It's the biggest thing that seems to be affecting the creative industry. So I need to understand it, and based on my take and the agency take generally, what technology is thinking about the people side. It's a hard one because I think it will be really good for some creatives and it will be very bad for some other creatives. And I don't think we can avoid that. And I think it depends on where on the spectrum of creativity we are. I mean, AI, we all know, will step in for the more functional, repetitious pieces of creativity. But on the flip side, the people that I know who've embraced AI and are miles ahead of other people generally are incredibly talented creatives. So one that I've spoken to, they're brilliant with Midjourney and they swear it's because they've got a previous career as a poet. So they're a brilliant prompter and they're brilliant at the artistic side of it because they had a career as a graphic designer. Now, so they're doing incredible stuff, I believe. So it's just really hard. It'll play out, AI will play out differently for different people. And I think as an individual and as a business, you need to think long and hard about your take on it and therefore how you're going to adopt it. Because at the minute, I think a lot of us are like a cork on the sea, just kind of been thrown about by AI. But, as a business, we've written a policy. Yeah. Nobody wants to hear about a policy. But the policy says our view of creativity and therefore our view of what we will allow in AI and creativity as a business. And you've got to start there, but also do that as an individual as well.
That's a fascinating step to take, that a business of your size writing policy. You would expect something like that in either a large consultancy or just an enterprise level business. And what you've done is taken a step towards creating a framework for how your business will adopt it. Did that take long to do that? Was that a difficult journey to go through?
The great thing is, it didn't take that long. It was a combination of what are the industry bodies saying, what do we think, and what's AI telling us? And it's the habit thing. I sometimes laugh about something. When I do something with other people and they go, oh, I'm thinking this about AI. How do I get the answer? I was like, have you thought about using AI? And they're like, oh, yeah. It's a habit thing for people generally, But so I would say it took under a day. But then it's a bit like all things were reality. It was then just let it percolate out in the agency. And then the great thing was our AI team eventually went, well, nobody reads a policy. Let's turn it into something more visual and let's share it. This was about after 3 months and make sure that everybody gets it. And it's evolved a bit as AI's evolved. But it's only, it's 2 pages of text.
So you just said a very interesting phrase there, your AI team. So what does that team do inside the business then? Because is it writing code? Is it bringing the AI tools together? Is it about harnessing AI? What do they do?
It's less the technical side because we leave people to do it by their discipline. It's more the cultural side. It's more the making it stick part, which is basically checking in every week, speaking to the people that matter in the agency and seeing how we're adopting it and dealing with challenges and getting people excited about it, kind of keeping the momentum. So it's not if AI had an HR team. That's about as close as I can get. I'm trying to avoid the word task force because it's an awful term.
Yeah, it is that. It certainly is that. We've been talking to a lot of businesses recently and saying to them, whatever happens, put an AI champion in your business. It's moving so quickly. There's so many tools being deployed. There's so many benefits that you can reap by using AI, but also some of those tools that claim to do certain
Yeah.
things don't do them very well. A lot of duplication. There's lots of shiny toys out there. Let's be honest. How are you keeping away from the shiny toys? Have you got that champion inside the business? Is it your AI team? How are you
Yeah,
filtering out the
working
noise?
through the different tools. But I think the other thing when we started that we learned quite quickly as an approach was don't think about the tools, think about the pain points. So go the other way around,
Yeah,
because, creative agencies have the same stuff challenges that all businesses have. So you can go two ways. You can like what are our pain points creatively? And just what are our pain points as an agency? Then look for the tools that solve those, because then you don't feel the need to look at 101 tools. You just look at the tools for that. I saw a talk a couple of months ago by an architectural company that's embraced AI, and they said for their industry there were 1,400 tools they could choose. So it's hard, and they've done it. So it was a really fascinating case study. But that's the scale of the challenge, and it's kind of unavoidable. But at least think about your pain points, think about your creative process, and therefore what you need. Not what do we need this, do we need that? Because that's just going to fall down.
yeah. One of the things that Priya Lakhani was saying was about AI is best used when it's hyper focused on specific problems, specific challenges, and it can be taught to deal with those specific problems and challenges and do it very well. When it steps out of the task that it's been created for in the first place, then the current generation is finding that difficult. Do you see that there's going to be vast numbers of useless AI tools out there, or do you think that it's almost going to get to hyper personalization of AI, an AI tool for companies or
I
individuals?
think the first part, yes, there will just be a massive plethora of unused tools, and that's part of the kind of industry model to get somewhere, it seems. But yes, I think, but the personalization can also come from the user. And, when I think about, working with clients, what you're really trying to do, and I look at what works with clients, is you have to personalize it for creativity before it's ready to do that job even. You have to train it on that brand's look and feel, tone of voice, what's in, what's out in lots of other ways. And then you're ready to roll. I think the challenge is, you see it all the time on LinkedIn. I put in this prompt and I asked X tool for an award-winning campaign for Volkswagen. Look at the dross that it came out with. But it's like, well, is that how you're briefed? Is that how you work in a pre-AI world? I think it's a slightly unfair comparison. I always think those tests of AI are a bit like saying, I got drunk, jumped in this car, I smashed it into this wall. God, it's a terrible car. Well, no, actually, it's the user kind of thing. And you'll see them, Matt. LinkedIn is full of these posts. I'm kind of like, I think you're saying more about yourself than you're saying about AI.
Yeah, yeah. I think a bit of judicious editing for people on LinkedIn would probably
Well,
not be
they're almost like
the worst thing in the
confessions,
world at
these
times.
LinkedIn posts, but hey ho.
Yeah, yeah, no, you're right. So, if I can ask you a question here about what would be your top three tips for brands wanting to work with a creative agency to implement AI? What
I
would they
think
be?
one, avoid the AI is the answer, what's the question kind of mentality. Is like, we are all learning as we go for all the reasons that you and I have chatted about. I think the second one is treat it as a long-term partnership. There's a case study for a telco brand, and the whole point was they had to do the hard yards that I talked about to build up tools that could do copy, that could do visual, that could do brand. But that took time. I think the danger is when we don't understand AI or don't understand it fully yet, people go for the cheaper and faster benefit. That might be true. It might not always be true. And without getting too philosophical, I think my third one would be have that conversation about what matters to you as a client about creativity and how you see creativity working. Nobody ever has this chat. I find it very strange that quite often we work in an industry where somebody asks for something and somebody gives somebody something without ever defining what that something really is. I want something creative. What do you mean by that? Maybe go back to a bit of the fundamentals, because also there are different types of creativity, and some of that creativity will be better with AI. Some of it will be quicker and cheaper with AI. Some of it might not be right for AI, or it might be a hybrid of, old world content creation with AI, and it's just being really clear about what's going to fit where.
Yeah. Okay. So look, we talked about AI a lot, and I get the feeling, in fact, I know that we could talk about this for hours, and I suggest we might do that over maybe a tall glass of something amber. But let me ask about HeyHuman, because we've been talking about AI and how it can be used for creativity and marketing, etc. But what about the challenges for HeyHuman and perhaps the marketing industry in general? How's that faring at the moment?
Choppy waters. I think somebody asked me, part of their industry survey last week, how optimistic I was, and I won't give away the score because it might have changed since then. But they said I was definitely in the upper quartile of positivity, which is always surprising for a Dara Scott. It's a hard industry currently. The AI word I'll push to one side, but we know that's happening. Plus uncertainty, You and I know that, we've all worked in uncertainty for the last 5 years. So everybody's dealing with that, and clients have changed their ways of working. So you can look at it that way, but you can look at it in the way that, is often said, creativity will be the most important resource that the world will need going forward. Because the bigger the problems, I won't list them all, we all know what they are out there in the world, the more we need creativity. So to me, it kind of depends how you look at it. There's no two ways to avoid the world's very uncertain. We all know that. It's a massive time of change in the industry. But actually, if you believe, if you got into the industry for creativity, for your belief in creativity, stick with it. That's the bit that should be still remain like gold dust if you can adapt as a business or as an individual.
Yeah. So that's there are choppy waters out there, most certainly. There's a lot of businesses that are either struggling or they haven't found their feet in the current environment. A strong leadership and management team is going to help that under the direction and vision of a CEO who's not completely blinkered about what's going on, who's not prepared to change their focus or understand what's happening in their industry. Classic case, the CEO of Nokia, when they were shutting down their telephone business, and the quote was, "We don't know what went wrong. We just don't understand what went wrong." That was clearly because they had blinkers. They couldn't see the iPhone was coming on. It was a completely different product. The business hadn't changed. There was a complete lack of understanding. It went from a behemoth to less than an also ran overnight. Do you think that's the danger with marketing agencies now? Unless they change with the times, both AI and what the fundamental models are. You mentioned previously that it's quite a transactional relationship now. Working with agencies used to be quite a long-term thing. And of course, there are still long-term deals around with media agencies. But when it comes to creativity, it's often done on a pitch-by-pitch basis on campaigns. what would be your tips for a marketing agency now to adapt to
Yeah,
change?
I mean, I guess two things. The first one, in terms of adapting to change, is it's a cliche, but you do have to be curious. You do have to be interested in getting out of the weeds and look at stuff and embrace it. I know that it might not always work and it might not always work long term. I mean, we invested heavily in neuroscience and kit and research and all that, and then the pandemic hit and suddenly it was impossible to do EEG research for putting stuff on people's heads and bringing them in face to face and all that. So that was an industry thing. So that very quickly stopped at something that we spent a lot of time on. But the learnings and what it tells us about effective, creative, etc. And then we found third parties to set up partnerships with as well. So you've just got to go with it. I think the other thing, to your point, is, and I know it's easy to say, but try and be selective in your client relationships. We are lucky enough to have some relationships within the agencies that we had for a long time, and they've moved from different businesses. Some have been at the start of HeyHuman and disappeared for 6 years and done their thing somewhere else, come back, set up another business and picked up the phone, that kind of stuff. We use 3 criteria, and it's so simplistic, but it's actually right. It's, friends, fame, and fortune. And ideally, you've got 3. If you haven't got 2, you start to ask questions. So the friends is like, are they good people? Do we have a good relationship? Or can we see having a good relationship? The fame piece is, can we do great work together? And the fortune bit is, do the financials stack up? And we've got a kind of minimum amount for the first year of working with a new client, but also a minimum amount for the second year. But, in that scenario, we might think, well, they're a great client. We know we love working with them. We know we can do great work with them, but actually they don't hit the financial criteria. So we might do it, or it might be, the other 2, but have that conversation. And I know, but also, I know that's an easy thing to say back in the real world. It's tough, but actually, it always comes back to haunt you. Suddenly, you never make money with that client that you should have had asked those 3 questions, or it drains the whole agency, or you're embarrassed about the work you do. None of those are great.
Okay. Now, I'm going to ask
Yeah.
one more question in this interview, and that is, if you could go back
Yeah.
2 years, is there one thing that you would have done differently in the journey of the last 2 years?
During the last 2 years, nothing immediately springs to mind. I think the challenge, the CEO role, is you always feel like you could do more. The only thing I would just say, and I apologise because I've gone back to it, but is, started a little bit sooner on the AI journey. But it's hard because we did that because we're also conscious of client appetite, because we'd gone slightly early and then stepped back a little bit because there was just this outburst of fear with clients because of the whole IP thing, which has kind of receded again. But I think whenever you ask me that 2 years question, I'll always say, I wish I'd done X a little bit faster. Because I personally think a CEO's job is about focusing on the future. So if you're not embracing stuff, whatever it is, and helping people see why it matters, I'm pretty sure you're not doing your job. There's lots of CEOs out there, but I think you've always got to say, like, am I the person who's boring people about the future? If that's possible, do you know what I mean? I mean, when I say boring, it's always like, yes, I know we're in the weeds, and I know you're finding this really tough, but let's think about where this is going, which I used to get done to me, and I found really annoying. Like, I'd go to my CEO with a crisis, and he'd say, yeah, but in 5 years' time, it's like, yeah, but maybe he should have sent me to the MD, is what I realised in the end. But, no, so the answer to that question will always be, I wish I'd done X that little bit faster 2 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, to your point, the CEO's primary role is to inspire and enroll the rest of the company into the vision, mission, and culture, into that vision of what the business is going to be. What I'm finding really interesting about my conversation with you today is the amount of research that you've done and knowledge that you've built up on in AI. Because I think it is terrifying some people, particularly in the creative industries and marketing too. And you seem to have taken a completely different tack. You've instead of jumping in, embracing it completely, or treating it as pariah, what you've done is done the homework and worked out how you can best utilize it. So you look like you're in pretty safe hands in that respect. So it's quite a practical step, actually. So a bit of visionary and a bit of practicality. So well done for that.
I'll
It's an
take that,
uncommon
Matt. I'll
mix.
take that.
Right. On that note, you could be the first one to buy the first
Sounds
round
like a
in the
plan.
bar
Sounds like a
at
plan.
some point in the
Brilliant. Thank you,
future.
Matt. There's some really good questions there.
I look forward to that. Neil, it's been, well, some fantastic answers. Neil Davidson, Hey Human, inspiring. Thank you very
Yeah,
much. Let's
brilliant.
speak
Thank you,
again
Matt.
soon. Thank you. Bye bye.